Hey everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. Today we have a cool, almost a classic vehicle in the shop, a 1997 Nissan Maxima V6 in fantastic shape. This car spent most of his time in Texas, right Rick?
Yes.
So this is the original owner, right? Did you get this thing pretty much new?
Yes, I bought it 3 years old in 2000, and it had about 35,000 miles on it. I think it was owned by a woman in Kentucky.
Okay. And how many miles does it have now?
About 256,000.
256,000, and it still has you down and treats you well, right?
Yeah, it's been running great.
All right, so so you've had the check engine light on for a little while, and it had a couple of issues starting, right?
Yes.
Can you explain when the problem happens, and you know, is it a cold start, warm start issue?
Yeah, about 8 years ago, the check engine light went on, and I went and had the code read, and it was an EGR code.
Okay.
And we did some repairs. A bunch of mechanics looked at it, changed some stuff out, didn't fix it.
Didn't fix it?
Did not fix it.
Okay. Did it have any drivability issues, or just the check engine light?
Just the check engine light.
Okay.
And then about 5 years ago, 3 years into that light being on, the car started to have a little rough idle.
Okay. Hey, it's a symptom of an EGR problem, could be.
A little rough idle. And then in the last couple of years, the car has been doing this interesting thing where if I come out in the morning and it's cold, and I turn it on, it'll fire right up. But if I drive it a little bit, stop, go into a store, come out and start it, it'll take a little bit to turn on.
Long crank time.
Long crank time. Kind of bizarre after it's warm, so those are the problems right now.
And once it starts, it doesn't stall out, it runs fine.
Right.
Okay, so we'll start there. We've got the scanner hooked up, and in this car, it's a 97, so it does have an OBD2 16-pin port down there, but it also has the Nissan 14-pin connector up here. So this is just for generic OBD2 emissions data, and this is if you want to go into, you know, the OEM side of things. So on the scanner, this is in OBD2 mode. We sure enough have the P0400 EGR-A flow. Now what I want to do is exit out of here. I mean, I guess we could look at some data, but we want to go into the OEM side for more information. So we'll switch vehicles. Do you want to add vehicle details? No. So back, no active vehicle. Now, I already put in the VIN, Nissan Maxima GXC, that was the generic one. This guy, activate, OEM specific. Now we have the vehicle there. Go into our scanner. That's a 3-liter V6, the legendary Nissan V6. And let's go to engine, automatic with air conditioning. Just connect Nissan to adapter. Use the DA5 cable adapter. So that's the 14-pin connector that they're talking about down here. So to do that, we'll disconnect the regular 16-pin, and I got the adapter. That's a little pigtail that plugs into our main cable, and this plugs into the vehicle. So we'll plug this guy in here, and then this guy will, if we can see, should plug in right into this gray port. So we have power. It's good. Now let's continue and see if we can communicate. And we'll take this thing for a spin and see what kind of data we can read on this EGR. You want to hop in, Rick? You can probably sit in the passenger seat if you want to hold the. We're there. That's fine too. All right, loading. It's talking the Nissan language. The Nissans can be a little quirky about this, but looks like we're in. Codes only. Let's see what we come up with here. That's the only one in the system. P0400. Okay. And we can go to Troubleshooter and look up this code. It does have a little rough idle right now. You can kind of feel it. It's like a little shaky, right? P0400. Let's get some information. Let's educate ourselves before we try to tackle this problem. P0400 sets when ECM detects low EGR flow or EGR flow when system should be off. ECM uses EGR temp sensor, interesting, to monitor EGR operation. System voltage should be less than 0.5 when EGR is operating and increase at idle when EGR is inoperative. Cool. If EGR temp sensor tests okay, test EGR system. After code has been cleared, vehicle should be driven to run EGR monitor. Now let's try it. There's our EGR temp voltage, 0.44, EGR solenoid on. To test EGR passages, lift EGR valve diaphragm by hand. Oh, that's cool. We can lift this thing by hand. Engine should stumble or stall. Easy test. If engine doesn't stumble, suspect clogged EGR passages. Test ride vehicle 40-50 miles per hour, steady throttle. When EGR displays off, EGR system is operating. When EGR operates, EGRT sensor should be less than 0.5 volts. Okay. If EGRT does not drop, check EGRT sensor signal, high RPM. Apply vacuum to EGR valve. EGRT should be less than 0.5 volts and EGR is operating. Increase and not operating. Test vacuum signal. This is a pretty good description here. So let's dive under the hood. Kind of smells like fumes in here. Definitely an exhaust leak somewhere. And try to find this EGR valve. So under the hood, coming down here, that's the EGR valve. It's kind of buried right down there. So not this guy, right down there. We got the custom hood prop rod. Just need some new struts. But I'm going to try to lift the diaphragm by hand. I'm having a really hard time lifting it. You can hear a little bit of change of some sort. We could put a little vacuum pump on there. We can see where the hose connects to the top of the EGR valve right there. So let's apply some vacuum and see what happens. So I got my handy dandy vacuum pump connected right to the top of the EGR valve. Let's see what happens. Definitely some change. It didn't stall. Almost stalled. So the EGR valve itself seems to work. And let's see what happens to our EGT sensor. It's 0.16 now, 0.14. 0.12, 0.1, okay. We'll release the vacuum. There's no EGR flow anymore. There shouldn't be. .14, 0.16. When EGR displays off, EGR system is operating. Okay. So we can test drive it, look at these data PIDs. Test vacuum signal to EGR valve, T vacuum gauge into vacuum signal hose, that EGR valve, and run gauge inside car. ECM may require speed sensor input to operate EGR system. Drive a car over 12 miles per hour. Gauge should show steady vacuum signal at constant throttle. No vacuum is present. Test the BPT valve and EGR solenoid operation. Okay. So this is similar to the Toyota Camry EGR system, I think, that we tested it in an earlier video, but this one uses that temperature sensor to look for flow. Okay, no block. EGR solenoid will block vacuum to EGR valve when energized and will allow vacuum to flow when EGR solenoid is not energized. That's the same as the Toyota system. EGR solenoid should have ignition, mechanical failure, stuck plunger, cause lack of EGR, vacuum to valve, plug gauge into vacuum source. So basically, we want to test the vacuum when the system is operational to make sure the other stuff is working. Alright, so we got our vacuum gauge on the windshield. When we drive this thing and it's happy, and then this EGR solenoid says off, we should see A, we should see some vacuum on that EGR valve, and B, we should see this number drop. We can actually see if in the data stream we see anything useful here. Back. Data, no codes. Fuel and air, auxiliary emissions. So this is our list for the emissions stuff. We have an EGR solenoid data PID, but I'm not seeing the EGR. Oh, there it is, EGR temp. Okay, so this is useful. Deselect all. We want to see EGR temp, EGR solenoid. List view. There we go. On and off. So let's take it for a spin. See what happens. Alright, so our EGR solenoid, when it's off, the EGR temp PID should drop as we're cruising, and this vacuum should go up. There it goes, about 10 inches of vacuum under light load. Should increase a little bit. Now there shouldn't be any vacuum on there when solenoid is on. You can see that EGR temp indeed did decrease. I want to see what happens if you put it in park and just rev it up. Okay, well, system seems to be working. And that question is, what's the known good EGR temp voltage when this, I guess it drops pretty close to zero? Well, how high should it go? There needs to be I think more than half a volt change to make this thing happy. We have to do a little more research on that. But so far, the EGR flow itself seems to be there. Vacuum, the vacuum is being modulated to the valve and everything's working. We'll take it out on the open road and see how this thing behaves. So here's some data recorded from the test drive. When the EGR system is active, we definitely see a drop in this EGR temp voltage data PID, but I don't like the amplitude. The maximum is only 0.5 and the minimum is about 0.1. So we're going to save that. The car runs beautifully, so far. Just a little rough idle. Otherwise, it seems to be happy. So let's go to our guided component tests and see if we can look into this EGR system. Fuel injection. EGR, does it have EGR system? EGR temp sensor. Let's see component information. Let's read up on this thing. Binding pinhole inside EGR solenoid is common, causing EGR to flow at idle. Huh. Interesting little tech tip. But that's not the case here because we're at 0 when the car is off. And you rev it up, you know, and it's not like a rough idle, really rough idle right now. EGR temp sensor. Component information. Sensor monitors changes in EGR passage temperature. During EGR operation, passage temperatures will change. EGR or sensor resistance decreases as EGR gas increases temp in EGR passage. Makes sense? EGR code will set if temp fails to change. Now, I'm not seeing any actual voltage readings here. Threaded into EGR guide tube at right rear of engine. ECM and temp signal. EGR valve failure. Plug passages and vacuum problems cause EGR code. EGR temp sensors are reliable. Carbon buildup on sensor can cause trouble code. Interesting. Well, resistance test, out of range, no signal test, DC voltage test. Monitor EGR temp sensor during test drive. Voltage should increase at idle and should be below 0.5 when EGR valve is open. Should increase at idle, but how much? That's my question. EGR solenoid. No, we're not interested in that. Let's go back to our scanner. Right now, 0.4. Why? Why isn't it 0.56? Is there a little bit of EGR flow right now at idle? There shouldn't be, because our solenoid is on. So even though we have no vacuum applied, there could be a little bit of EGR flow through that valve if that pintle isn't closing properly. It could explain the slight, rough idle. See, it's dropping it. That shouldn't be the case. Unless the car is sitting here and getting hot soaked and everything's just getting hot. So that's, a possibility. So we'll grab it a little more. And we have to find out what a good maximum value for that EGR temp should be. Right now in drive, it's a little shaky. I give it a little gas. Gets smoother. So, since we couldn't get the EGR temp above like 0.7, well, you know what? Let's just shut it off, turn the key back on, and let the system cool down. And look at that. Almost 2.5 right now. So, the sensor itself seems to work fine, but for some reason, there is EGR flow at idle. When the system, EGR solenoid's off, we have no vacuum. I think that EGR valve is letting a little bit of that exhaust gas through when it's not supposed to. So this is what we're supposed to see when the system is not active. Look at that, 2.6. So it's probably go all the way up to 5. So let's start up the car. And I got a little rough idle. And look at that, shooting straight down. That's not supposed to happen. You can definitely feel the roughness, right, Rick?
Yeah.
Shooting straight down. And I don't think we had any vacuum on our gauge, but if you rev it up, that'll get this sensor going down even quicker. So let's try that again. Let's see, exit out, shut it off. We have no change in the vacuum reading, which is good. The controls are good. Well, that's a cool experiment. Why don't they tell you that in the instructions? You gotta use your head a little bit. Key on, engine off. They should at least give you a voltage, like a baseline. That's pretty neat. Now this doesn't necessarily explain a hard warm start. I mean, I guess it could, but it might be a separate issue. So we want to see emissions. So again, car's off. We're at 2.6. Start it up. Look at that, shoots straight down. That EGR sensor should not heat up that fast. Definitely feel that rough idle. And the car runs fine otherwise, so there's no reason to suspect, you know, a short injector or misfire problems. This is all making sense here. EGR solenoid on. There should be no EGR flow, and just judging by that, there definitely is. So we'll save that, and you know, so the owner tells me that the EGR valve was replaced to try to correct this condition, and it didn't work, didn't help. The engine does use a little bit of oil, so the EGR valve, that pintle, if it doesn't seat properly just due to carbon buildup, but a new valve should solve the problem, at least for a while. Now, Rick, do you know if it was an OEM Nissan valve, or was it a cheap aftermarket crappy valve?
Don't know.
Probably cheap crappy aftermarket valve.
Probably.
Probably. That's what I'm going to assume, because it's letting some gas through right now. And did this rough idle, you said, did it occur right when the check engine light came on, or a couple years later?
It was right a couple years later.
A couple years later, okay. I mean, it could have been getting worse and worse. You know, the computer flagged it, and then you kept driving, and now you got even more flow, and it's actually affecting the drivability. And the rough idle, did that come before or after the hard warm start?
Before.
Okay. So you got rough idle, and now you got rough idle and a hard warm start.
Yes.
So it's all kind of progressing.
Yes.
You know, worse and worse. Okay. And you said recently you turned it on and it stalled out right away on a cold start.
Yes, that was very recently, in the last week.
Okay. That I could believe that. If the EGR valve is stuck open, you turn it on, and instead of, you know, getting fresh air into the engine, you have some exhaust recirculation going on. The computer's confused, and you know, the baseline's off. So just doing a visual inspection in this car, I was trying to find the exhaust leak, and lo and behold, from underneath I actually saw this, but we can see it from up here too. Check that out, right there. See if we can focus in on this. See that nut hanging out? That's the EGR pipe coming from the exhaust manifold to our EGR valve, and it's all black. So there's your exhaust leak. There's the nut that's not doing anything, so we have to correct that. However, the EGT, exhaust gas temperature sensor, that little guy lives. See where my finger's pointing? Everything's really buried here. So after the gas goes to the valve, and the valve opens, it comes up through this shinier pipe. Ah, man, you really can't see it. Where's the shiny pipe? Can I see the corner of it? We'll try to zoom in. There's the pipe, the metal pipe down there, and the temperature sensor. You can see the pigtail coming out right there. So if that's heating up, that means the exhaust gas is still going through the EGR valve. So we can put the nut back on, do the same experiment, but I think we'll still have the problem where the valve is a little open, and then this pipe heats up, and the exhaust gas is introduced into the intake manifold when it's not supposed to. But still, we have to fix that problem. So we'll try that. Otherwise, it's just oil leaks. There's some oil leaks. You pop this guy up, put a new O-ring on there or something. But it needs a little TLC. Right, Rick?
Yes, sir.
It came to the right place for the TLC. I love getting old cars like this and, you know, back to their former glory. Alright, so we're done with our little mini tune-up. I got the big nut over, tighten on that tube. It's kind of a pain. You have to align the tube first and then grab the nut, and then with a big adjustable wrench, but it's on there. Clean the throttle body. This little shaft here, it's like a mechanical cold idle valve. Sprayed this with WD-40. Adjusted this bent tab back, so now our throttle body is fully closed as it should be. It's clean. Also fixed a little oil leak here. Replaced an O-ring on this camshaft position sensor. So the car is getting there. Let's redo the experiment. So now that the EGR system is, everything's hooked up properly, let's monitor that temperature when the car is just idling and see if it shoots through the roof, see how it idles, and make the call from there. Alright, so our EGR temp is at 4 volts. It's cold. Let's fire it up, see what happens. Well, it's going back down pretty quickly here. I'll rev it up a little bit. Yeah, I don't think it should heat up. And the idle is still a little funky, right, Rick? Let's see if that tube is heating up really fast. So indeed, right now with the valve, off, there's still some EGR valve flow, but at least there's no more exhaust leak. So to be 100%, we could just pull the control line off the valve and look at the temperature. It's still dropping, so I don't know if we can clean out the EGR valve, but if you're going to go that far, might as well replace it. That shouldn't be dropping right now. Alright, that's it for now. The car is diagnosed. Needs a new EGR valve. Simple as that. I guess we'll be back with the repairs. It looks like it's kind of a pain to get to, but we'll do what we have to do. We'll order an original or high quality replacement part and install it, and this car should idle a little smoother. And the we can't really recreate the hot start, the long crank time, but if it happens again with the new valve on there, we'll diagnose that separately. That's it. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you guys in the repairs. Bye bye.